Welcome to my channel. I will be presenting you a short tutorial about the first basic steps of object drawing, in which we will be covering the measurements and the outlining of the objects. We will be drawing two basic objects, a spray can and the cap of the spray can. For the first task, you will be needing a 30 cm ruler, an HB pencil, and a rubber. You will also be needing an A3 paper. If you're going to attach it to a board, you can use masking tape. Here I have prepared for you a rough sketch in order for you to understand what will be achieved in the first task. The first thing I will be doing is drawing a 1 cm border line. This in order to make sure that my objects will not be drawn outside of the paper and therefore creating a balance within. When drawing objects, first we have to consider the height and the width in order to make full use of the paper space and create a balance within the drawing. Therefore, the more the objects are high and close to each other, the chance is to keep the paper in portrait format. While if the objects are far from each other and low, the chance is to keep the paper in landscape format. When drawing an object, one has to consider that it is sitting on the table. Therefore, the first step is to draw a line on the paper, preferably below or above the center line, in order to create a better composition. In this case, we will draw the line below the center. And remember, this line will represent the space the objects will be sitting on. Here I have drawn a line at 15 centimeters from the bottom. Now here comes the tricky part. I will be taking the measurements of the objects using the ruler. I'm using the 0 centimeter mark with the bottom of the can. And then checking the overall height, which in this case is 10 centimeters. And the width is 8 centimeters. In order to make sure that you measure the objects properly, always stretch your arms and close one eye. Here now at the end we have 10 centimeters height and 8 centimeters width. If we have to draw the can at the size of 10 centimeters, we will realize that it will be too small. Therefore, what we have to do is multiply by 2, 3, 4 or more, depending on the size of the paper. Here I have decided to measure by times 3, and therefore we will have the drawing in a space of 30 centimeters by 24 centimeters. What I did was multiplying the numbers I mentioned earlier, 10 centimeters and 8 centimeters by 3. As mentioned earlier, we have now to consider the size of the drawing. If we are going to draw 10 centimeters by 8 centimeters, the drawing will be very small in dimension compared to the size of the paper. In this case, I will be using the measurements I have mentioned earlier. Therefore, a reminder is to multiply 10 centimeters and 8 centimeters by 3, which equal to 30 centimeters by 24 centimeters. Therefore, the objects will fit more or less inside the following space, which I am marking with 4 dots. And the next task is to check the size of the individual objects and the space in between. We always have to make sure that we do the right measurements, including the space between the objects. The spray can will be in this area. So, since both objects are more or less the same width, we have to divide the calculation of the width we did earlier, so it will be 24 division by 2 equals 12. And we add the 0.5 mm gap to go between the objects. This has been calculated earlier using the ruler. Now we need to mark the center of the objects. Now that the lines have been marked, we know that the spray can will be in the following area and the cap in the other designated area. Remember, now we're taking the measurements of individual objects. Therefore, we have to make sure that when we stretch our hand, the whole area from the width, it has to show from 0 to 8. Now what you have to do is do minus the extra object. So example, the cap is about 3 to 4 centimeters. And the spray can is more or less the same size. And we multiply, in this case, by 3. This of course depends of the base you are working on, as we have mentioned earlier. Here I have marked the areas of both objects. When drawing objects, we always have to think about basic shapes, meaning cube, sphere, cone, and cylinder. In this case, we have a cylinder, a semisphere, and another cylinder for the spray can. And we have the shape of a cylinder for the cap of the spray can. Now I can start outlining the spray can and the rest of the objects. As you can see, the measurements helped me in giving the object drawing the correct proportions. The cap of the spray can is a little bit more forward than the actual spray can. Now we have always to pay attention to these details as much as possible. So this is the first part of the object drawing. Um, as you can see, we paid attention to space, to the perspective, and we have taken the measurements. It's very important you always go backward and forward to check that what you have been drawing is quite close to the actual objects. Thank you for following. See you for the next task.